Dungeons and Dragons.
While this name may strike fear into your hearts and make you believe that you're going to be summoning demons and casting witch magic, I'm afraid to say that the only thing you will be summoning with this board game, and with great difficulty I may add, is friends. Yes, friends. Sometimes you could find a group online or navigate the messy sewers that is Discord until you can get a group together that consists of the pessimist, the weeaboo, and the guy who either takes everything as a joke or is the staple definition of that guy. But don't worry, as the hardest part of starting a game of Dungeons and Dragons is finding a dungeon master. And seeing that you have arrived here upon my doorstep seeking knowledge on how to do just that, well, I take it that part is filled. Now, getting started with being a dungeon master isn't something that's all that difficult. Trust me, I've been dungeon mastering for a couple of years now, and while I'd still call myself a beginner, my players have found me pleasant enough to play with that I've been blessed, or cursed, with the loving role of the forever DM. But as long as you enjoy the process of world building, setting up funny scenarios that you might see occur on little shorts online, or laughing as you watch your close friends struggle with the fact that their characters aren't actually immortal after the first arc of your game has ended and they're finding themselves battling monsters more at their speed and not dumbed down to assist in the learning process, well, you will be able to sit back and enjoy a lovely time opening up socially with your friends and exploring a world of your creation through the view of those close to you. Alrighty, I'm gonna ditch the silly voice for now, unless you would all prefer it. But getting right into it, dungeon mastering I think is often seen as much harder than it really needs to be. I'd argue it's still harder to be a dungeon master than being a player, at least to do it well, but it doesn't require writer-level storytelling and minis and maps to make established D&D shows such as Dimension 20 or Critical Role cry. First and foremost, it requires a devoted and caring person with lots of patience for themselves, their creativity, and most importantly, their friends, because they find ways to surprise you in both good and bad ways. But that's how the game goes, and it's those moments that will give you stories to share with others for years to come. I'd say the best place to start when learning how to be a dungeon master is to take the player's handbook, and I'd suggest finding some time before you sit down and play to give it at least one good read from front to back. Your aim here isn't to memorize everything, but it at least plants a seed for some of the rules that may pop back into your head during the game, or give you a general idea of where they are in the book should you need to look them up later. Of course, you don't need to do this, but I did it when I started and I found it really helpful, especially for some of those smaller and more specific rulings that you may not have thought of before. If you really have time, you can do a full read-through of the Dungeon Master's Guide too. However, I found that the DMG generally contains a lot of world-building information that isn't required if you're playing a pre-written adventure. However, it does contain a lot of good rules, and if you're planning on running a homebrew game, I'd strongly recommend giving it a good read for some general information like, how much gold should I give out to my level 3 players? Or what are the general prices of magic items? From this point on, I will assume you're looking to create your own story and campaign setting, and I'll give tips as such. After getting a general gist of the rules, I'd suggest taking some time to remember the main ones, being how skill checks and attack rules work, what modifiers you add to specific weapons, as well as some things like how to calculate passive perception, and general info that you should be able to answer if your players happen to forget. After all, being the Dungeon Master basically makes you the de facto leader of the group, or as I've found, the group's dad, mom, or parent respectively. So when someone is lost, you'll be the first person that should aid them in getting on the right track. You will also be the final say of the group, and while that means you'll have a lot of power, make sure to be kind and respectful of your players. If you're power hungry and run a game that others feel belittled playing in, they won't come back, and now you're out of a job, and the source of all that power you took for granted. I mean, after all, you can't rule over people if you don't have people to rule over. So, feel free to let your evil side out during small moments of role-playing or when they're fighting the BBEG. That's the big bad evil guy, aka the final boss usually. Otherwise, you'll want to be firm but reasonable. Say a player wants to bend the rules slightly to perform an action that may be interesting. Don't feel the need to stick strictly to the rules in the player's handbook. You can alter them a bit or suggest changes if you find it more entertaining as a group and everyone enjoys it. However, do be careful, as the rules that are written generally are made to ensure a balanced gameplay. Too much homebrewing may lead to a very easy or very hard time later on in your campaign. Next up, beyond the rules, is the planning segment, which is often highly debated between DM to DM. Personally, I lean more on the plan more now versus later, but plan loosely like puzzle pieces. That way you can drop them in where they fit as to not railroad your players. And be aware of the difference between nudging the group in a direction by sprinkling reminders for them here and there, and railroading. If the goal is clear, but the group wants to take some time and make their own filler episode checking out the beach and digging for treasure, let them. You want them to have fun, of course, and who knows, that magical item side quest that you've been planning in the woods may end up being hidden beneath the sand for your players to stumble upon and think it was there all along. The DM screen functions like Schrodinger's curtain. As far as your players know, you create all these quests, NPCs, and locations for them to explore plenty of time in advance with a lot of detail and thinking. While behind your screen in reality, it's more like a viscous fluid with some chunks of detail and notes stirred within. I highly suggest for the creation of NPCs this one site I stumbled across called npcgenerator.com. It provides fun and interesting, loosely set up NPCs that you can use and alter to fit within your games, and further flesh out. I suggest using it to create some fun shopkeepers and have a list of various quirky NPCs for each town in case you need an interesting figure for the characters to interact with if they happen to walk into a tavern suddenly that you didn't plan for. That way, you can go from having your general rough human shopkeeper to having Isabel, the loving and caring older gnome lady, running her scroll store within a whimsical building with a fake book as a roof. Already, it makes the characters much more intriguing and approachable to allow for fun role-playing and voices. As a side note on the topic of role-playing and voices, if you know what kind of game you want to run, whether it's a more role-play focused game, an adventuring boss rush, or a pure dungeon run, make sure to take note of that and explain it to your players in Session 0. As well as if you want your players to roleplay more. For many, it will take time, as many of us are socially anxious, and being that vulnerable may be uncomfortable. Many may need time before they're comfortable enough to get in character, if at all, and that's fine. Just remember, as the DM, make sure everyone is comfortable and nip any conflict or targeted jokes at other players in the butt. Be a role model that the others can rely upon, and one way I've found to help others break out of their shells is to be ridiculous yourself. Do silly voices and bombastic gestures, and in time your players will grow more comfortable with the established environment you set. As for what is a Session 0, I'll cover that in another video. For now, I'll focus on the pre-session stuff. Now that you have some general notes on locations and NPCs, I look into making a list of items that are of level that your players could buy or may be interested in acquiring, such as health potions or low-level one-time use magic scrolls. You can even include slightly stronger magic items, but with a hefty price tag that will incentivize your players to come back once they can afford it. With all this information, we have the startings of a town or a couple towns. I'd try to get a general name of the location and maybe a small history in case it comes up, or if your plot hooks rely on such. Nothing super detailed, just information on how it runs, maybe if it's a trade town, what its main exports are, things like that. Small details that give the location character and make it feel unique. And lastly, with this world that's unveiling before you, construct a few loose plot points, such as a start, a loose end, and a couple of twists you could throw in. With the general world built, or at least as much as they will likely run into in the first act of your campaign, you should be set to run a Session 0 and get to know your players' characters and backstories. With that, you can continue to plan more specifics for each session. That way you have more to work with every week and you know where the players last left off. I'd recommend keeping your first BBEG small and work your campaign like a multi-act play. The first big bad can be more like a tutorial revealing the much larger world the players inhabit after they defeat them and leaving them off on a cliffhanger or big change that will leave your players grasping for more and coming back every week or two. Next thing you know, it will be you role-playing gods and corrupt kings, with your players giving speeches to bolster the morale of their party, or weeping tears as the party pet may have been slain in a glorious and sad death. Hey, if you watched this full video, I just want to say thank you for the support. If I left anything out that you would like to mention, make sure to leave a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like. All in all, I would like to create a full series with this in the same style, as well as other different games or things to talk about. So if you want to keep an eye out for future creations of mine, make sure to subscribe. Thank you and have a lovely day.